We will go straight into business, and our first candidate to address us is Mr. Phil Renouf.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Conitable, and thank you all for coming along this evening. My name is Phil Renouf. Now, this is the point in Hustings speeches where each candidate will usually give a list of reasons why they should be trusted to make decisions for you. And like many things in politics, this makes little sense. The enormity of asking people to trust decisions offering solutions to unknown issues up to 4 years in the future is a nonsense that is possible to avoid. I want to do something else, so please let me start from the beginning. I've been asked so many times recently, why have you put yourself forward as a candidate? What do you hope to achieve? And I answer that I've spent a lot of time looking at the way the states make decisions for us, and frankly concludes that the whole arrangement is poor. I would like to talk about a political system that encourages participation of the electorate, where anyone is able to raise issues, to be included in debate, and to take part in the decision-making process directly throughout the term of government. Not in an advisory way as we treat our current referendum system, but in a way that is binding. Such a system is called direct democracy. We are well used to it at a parochial level, to decide issues such as rates. It is also practiced at a municipal, canton and federal level in Switzerland for many hundreds of years and is a contributory factor to that country's stability and excellent performance on the Social Progress Index. It is absurd that given the collective wisdom that we possess as a community of 100,000 people, that we elect 49 persons to a position of power over our lives and then allow a mere handful of ministers to dominate the decision-making process. Champions of our present system will exercise words such as leadership and integrity, yet this is the very system that has so far failed to deliver a hospital, withholds information from their own mechanisms of scrutiny, and has inexplicably given us an aircraft registry. What we need is a petition process through which we can raise or challenge issues, a feature that I, if elected, will fight vigorously to introduce, a feature that will allow individuals or groups to gain support for issues that are commonly ignored. We need to be involved in debate with access to all relevant information, a debate in which we are able to address concerns for the environment, for expectation of young and the elderly, certainly where concern for cost is given the respect it deserves, but is not the only parameter by which we make decisions that suit us. We need full inclusion within the decision-making process so that our politicians are encouraged to court our support in order to pursue policies that they wish to introduce. Such a feature would surely promote a level of transparency that is currently lacking. I will work hard to achieve these things because it is important to distinguish between promises that are good for Jersey and those that are good for Jersey people. If elected, I will be but one voice amongst 49, but I undertake to not only listen to all concerns, but also to conduct myself in a manner that encourages participation for all within our system of governance. I undertake to hold public meetings and to represent the decisions of the electorate of St. Clement, importantly, even when they may clash with my own. St. Clement faces changes brought about by an increasing population that puts pressure on our infrastructure, including transport and education. St. Clement faces challenges to our green spaces brought about by the need for more housing and a contracting rural economy. The solutions that we are able to provide together are likely to be better suited to our needs than those foisted on us by a council of ministers that shows itself to be repeatedly out of touch with the pulse of the people it represents. Are you satisfied with the present system? Direct democracy is a credible choice and is available at this election right here in St. Clement. If you have the confidence to vote for me into this position, it will be my honour and duty to serve you. Thank you.
I now invite Deputy Susie Panel to address us.
Good evening, Conitable, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you all for attending. Affordability, balance and common sense. These are the ABC values I apply to my life and work. I have had 6.5 years, 2 terms, as deputy representing St Clement, and much has been achieved, with more to do. I am running again for deputy of St Clement because I want to continue the work that has been done and see through that which is outstanding. My re-election would provide continuity to the parish and parishioners, ensuring that the experience and knowledge I hold can be put to best use. Whilst being deputy, my additional role as Minister for Social Security has been incredibly valuable in being able to assist many parishioners with inquiries I receive about the long-term care scheme, benefits and pensions. I have always maintained that a 30-year long-term view is essential when planning for health and well-being. In 2 terms, I have fulfilled my previous election promise with the introduction of the Disability Discrimination Law, with discrimination laws on race, sex and age. I have brought in the legislation extending maternity and paternity rights. These laws bring positive benefit to our community and to almost every parishioner or family in Jersey. Through the Social Security Back to Work scheme, I've helped bring unemployment to an all-time low. We have to meet today's needs without compromising future generations. Sustainability of our environment, pension fund, finance industry, hospitality, agriculture and retail is paramount. For example, we have to protect the Social Security Reserve Fund, or pension fund. There will be an additional 11,000 pensioners by 2035, and it is the workers of today and tomorrow who will be paying their pensions. Other issues that I want to address include to help seek solutions to social housing in the parish without further greenfield development, to support aspirations for a new sports centre at La Rocquier School, rather like a Le Kennevet of the East with swimming pool and possible skate park, to help to progress the plans for a new hospital, to bring about a new population policy. Of course, we must continue to limit population growth as best we can. This is not simple. If it was, there would not be an issue. There is now a realistic proposition before the states. It recognises the need for immigration so as to ensure our public services and key industries are properly staffed. And it proposes the introduction of a work permit system to further tighten up the employment restrictions. This will need to be carefully designed to ensure that it meets the objectives. On government structure, most of us would agree that changes to the way public services are run are long overdue. This is already underway as a result of the machinery of government proposition passed in the States on the 20th of March this year. I want to contribute to and participate constructively in the new government constitution. On the voluntary sector, I am particularly keen that the states do more to build partnerships with and support the wonderful voluntary sector in Jersey, comprising probably about 800 charities and making a contribution in excess of £80 million per year in funds raised and time given to our island community. This support should not be just about making grants, which should be for at least a 3-year period to allow sensible planning of services, but the states need to do more to build capacity in the sector and establish greater trust and confidence between them. I support the recent proposal by the Jersey Community Partnership for the appointment of a civil society minister or assistant minister to lead this initiative. On the environment, there are a number of issues to address, including protecting green spaces and the better use of brownfield sites island-wide. Electric cars. Jersey could be electric for all vehicles. It is the right-sized area and population. Reduce plastic waste, especially for a plastic-free coastline. I believe that experience and continuity are vital in a very uncertain time in Jersey politics. I am a Jersey girl and have lived in St Clement for 23 years. I have a good understanding of how the parish works and what parishioners want, to have their voices heard and their corners fought. I'm still chairman of the Brigadon Children's Charity and a governor of La Rocquier School. St Clement is a wonderful parish. It is an honour to live here and represent others who do too. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.
I now invite Ms. Samantha Morrison to address us.
Good evening, Conatable, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for attending this evening. Life has delivered me a challenging journey, which has ultimately sculpted me into the person who is standing before you today. My longest-serving position, worth more than the collective sum of any salary, has been a role as a married mother of 4, caring for my 14-year-old child who has multiple complex needs. My personal experiences have made me strong, determined, committed, and compassionate. I know how it feels to struggle. For over 10 years, I have fought on behalf of my son, and to this day, I continue to fight on behalf of all our currently silent voices. It is unacceptable that someone needing access to talking therapies has to wait for up to 7 months between getting a referral and receiving treatment. It is unacceptable that 1/3 of pensioners, 1/3 of children, and half of single parents living locally are doing so in poverty. It is unacceptable that some Jersey parents are having to homeschool their children due to inadequate levels of support, which are currently failing students in some mainstream schools. The service I offer throughout my election campaign is built upon a strong foundation of respect, honesty, and empathy. Having canvassed in some of the most deprived areas of our parish, I have witnessed levels of poverty which should shame every single States member who has voted in favour of cuts to support for our most vulnerable. Where is the moral justice in stealing from the vulnerable and the poor to save the skin of the most wealthy? I have met with people who bear the burden of multiple physical and mental health conditions, surviving on an endless cycle of repeat prescriptions with no counselling opportunities having ever been offered to them. Some have welcomed me into their homes enthusiastically, happy to have finally met someone who has taken the time to sit down and to listen to them. I have seen their disillusionment. I have felt their frustration. Imprisoned behind chained and bolted doors, these worthy individuals are someone's sister, someone's brother, someone's son, someone's daughter, someone's mother, and someone's father. They are real people living in our parish. Some currently surviving on less than £20 per week once all their essential bills are paid. This money must also cover their food. Lately, St Clement has become a concrete jungle, a common concern which has been frequently raised. Extensive public consultation with us, the rates-paying parishioners, must be treated as a priority before any further developments are approved. Is it any wonder why voter turnout has fallen to less than 40% in St Clement and also island-wide? Stuck in a never-ending, overcrowded, overpriced cycle of noise, poverty, debt and despair, many do not believe their voices count or anything will ever change. For some, with their consent, I have already taken the first step of referring them for further support. If you put your faith in me, I will continue my parish outreach with a stronger support network behind me. I will build upon our community of kind parish volunteers who work tirelessly to ensure our most vulnerable residents do not go hungry. Unlike the disappointing experience of an individual who contacted me yesterday, requesting for support they had been previously promised prior to an election 2 elections ago, but to this day have never received. I will be available to meet on a regular basis to discuss your concerns and act promptly upon them. As a committed and passionate person standing for a fully accountable, caring political party, I am determined to fight on behalf of those whose voices cannot be heard. I promise I will work with you. I promise I will work for you. And I promise I will respect you. The time has come to put the needs of the people before the wants of the wealthy and embrace an equal society where everyone's voice is heard. This forthcoming election provides us with a golden opportunity to create a brighter, happier and more fulfilling future for all. If we work together with a blank canvas, we can all participate in the painting of a positive picture. A picture of a beautiful island, united in hope, striving in strength and successful in action. The true Jersey way. Our island's future lies in your hands. Please vote with your hearts and your consciences on May the 16th. Please vote Reform Jersey. Thank you.
Now it is the turn of Mr. Lindsey Ashe.
Mr. Conatable, ladies and gentlemen, if you read the letters page in the JEP, you listen to the chap in the pub, or even some of the 90-odd candidates who are standing in this general election, you may be forgiven for thinking you live in one of the poorest suburbs of Calcutta. Well, you don't. For the vast majority of people, Jersey is a great place to live. Let's get that established right from the start. Can it be bettered? Yes, of course it can. Anything can be improved on. And one of the areas it can be improved on for people in St Clement's is by sending a message from this assembly today to the States when it reassembles. Would you please leave our greenfield sites alone? I was fortunate enough last year to go to an economic forum. Susie Panel was there as well. And they had a Danish woman sitting on the panel. And she said, in Denmark, they have better pensions. They have free at the point of entry healthcare, i.e. you don't pay £40 to see the doctor. And they have free nursery education. But, and it's a very, very big but, it's a sort of Kim Kardashian of a but. They pay 45% basic rate tax. We pay 5% GST, they pay 25%. And she said, and she's lived here for a couple of years now, for our 20-odd%, we get one hell of a good deal in Jersey. And I think we do. But, and this is a smaller but, when you are working on a limited tax budget, you cannot afford to waste that money, which is why the money wasted in the planning of the hospital is quite frankly unacceptable. Those of you who are good enough to read my manifesto would see that I've got 3 core sectors of society that you should look after. One is the elderly, particularly those in need of long-term care. The second is the young, the vulnerable young, particularly have been let down over past years, as we all know. And the third is those who are in genuine need. And due to the recent Caritas report, we have seen there are people in genuine need, and that must be sorted out as soon as possible. But there's a fourth group, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll just tell you a little story to emphasise this fourth group. It happened in the last general election when someone wrote to the paper saying his daughter had come back from university, and she said, I'm going to vote Labour, Dad. I think they've got some great ideas, and it wouldn't hurt you to pay a little extra tax. Well, as she'd just come back, he didn't want to get into an argument, so they sat down. And he said, how's it going at university? She said, brilliant. She said, I've nailed the thesis. I'm going to get a first, but I've worked hard. He said, good. He said, how's your mate Sally getting on? She said, absolute nightmare. She rarely comes out of her room, one man after another. The only time she comes out to go to the bar, she hasn't even started the thesis. He said, well, I've got an idea. Why don't you give her your thesis? You could cobble something together. You'd still get a 2-1. She'd get some sort of a degree. She went, that's a great idea, Dad. Well, I do all the work and she gets the benefit. He goes, well, you're the one voting Labour. Now that's probably a little harsh on the Labour Party, in fact, but the point I'm making is that there is a fourth group, and that's the people that pay tax. The men and women who go to work every day to pay this tax, and they need our consideration. And all the members of the states, when they reconvene, should remember that it's not their money that they're spending, it's the taxpayers, ladies and gentlemen. It's your money. Thank you very much.
And our final speaker is Ms. Chloe Freeman.
Hi, welcome. Tonight I'd like to be able to convey to you some of the reasons why I've chosen to stand this year and some of my personal passions. I'm passionate about health, about welfare, and about representing those who are more vulnerable in our society. I was brought up in St Clement's and lived with my family at Green Island for over 20 years, so it would be an honour for me to represent the parishioners in this next government. Before and whilst being at university, I worked and volunteered in community care, which has given me the ability to make important decisions which affect people's lives. I have a range of personal interests which I was able to focus my degree studies on, including cultural heritage and identity. I believe I could integrate these interests with a position of deputy by protecting our green spaces and preserving the sense of identity that so many people fear is being lost in Jersey. In today's world, we see how modernisation and technology are streamlining our efficiency, minimising paperwork and minimising risk. As time and sometimes money is saved, where does this leave effectiveness? We can look around us and see that these effective systems are still working, but when we become numbers in a computer, when we become statistics and come together only as that and not as a community, how then can we see how these things are working? Let me make clear my fundamental belief. I believe in the power of people. Without people, economics, business, finance, technology, and politics is meaningless. In 2014, the Income Household Distribution Report concluded that 1 in 3 pensioners and 56% of single-parent families were living in relative poverty on the island. But these are only numbers, these are only statistics. The fact is, there are real people behind these numbers. There are real people on our island whom we've failed. Since the change in 2008 from the parish welfare system, there have been no full-scale reviews of its effectiveness. What we have gained in St Clement is the community support team, whom have worked tirelessly to sustain that important human connection for the vulnerable. The anchor on our parish crest symbolises strength and stability, but it wouldn't work without the chain which holds that anchor to the ship. Each individual link in that chain is as valued as the last. Through these times of uncertainty, we might feel like we're all at sea, but we can show our strength by coming together every 4 years and voting for whom we believe is right to represent us. Through my experience of working with the elderly, working with people suffering with poor mental health, with various disabilities, I believe I can be the bridge that is needed between the states and the public. We need to re-engage those who have been disempowered and re-establish trust within our government. What I've learned from care work is that regardless of our struggles, regardless of our misfortunes, we can care. I believe that this should also be mirrored today by saying, regardless of our success, regardless of our fortune, regardless of our own comforts, we can care. Reform Jersey holds within it a core set of values which I stand by: equality, justice, and democracy. I'm standing to promote fair and equal systems which work in the best interests for the majority of islanders. What we aim to achieve is a social democratic government who put the priority of people first. As every speech needs a good quote, I've chosen Victor Hugo, who is a past resident who campaigned for the rights of the poor. Life, misfortune, isolation, abandonment, poverty, these are all battlefields with their own heroes, obscure heroes, sometimes greater than the illustrious ones. We of Reform Jersey have put together a detailed manifesto which will put our aims into action. Through being part of a team, we will be able to work efficiently and effectively towards our 10 pledges and ensure that transparency and accountability is withheld. Whether it is change you fear or change you dream of, what we know for certain is that change will always come. And this is the fact which we must accept. It is now that the links in the chain must come together and hold steady our anchor. I'm Chloe Freeman, and I'm ready to represent you on our next government. Thank you.
Well, thank you, candidates. We now come to questions. If I will ask in a moment those who wish to ask a question indicate by raising their hand. If I call you, perhaps you could stand up, wait for the microphone to come to you, state your name and confirm that you are a St Clement resident. And if I could ask you kindly to keep your questions short, sharp and to the point and not to make speeches. That's for these guys to do. The question must also be asked of all candidates. So it can only accept questions that can be answered by all of the candidates. Each candidate will have up to 2 minutes to answer the question, and a bell will go 30 seconds before that time is up, and a final bell at the 2-minute stage if they do take that long, when they will be asked to move on to the next candidate. So without further ado, I will ask if there is a question. I see a gentleman at the back with a beige shirt. I can't see.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Mike Etienne, St Clement's boy all my life. I have a very simple question, and it has to do with everything that hasn't happened for many, many years. Where do we stand on accountability?
Where do we stand on accountability? Mr. Renouf.
I'm not too sure quite what answer you're looking for there. I would like to see direct democracy in Jersey, which I think was going to make everything much more accountable, in that everybody will then be able to demand answers to the questions that they want answered. I'm not sure if you want anything else of an answer. That will? Okay.
Can't have a debate. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Panel.
Thank you, Mr. Etienne, for your question. In my view, accountability goes with responsibility, and if you have a job, whatever the job is, with any responsibility, accountability goes with that. You should be answerable, certainly in a political way, to the people who have voted you in, and you should be totally accountable to the public who have voted you into the job. Equally, that goes with anything else in life. If you are selected for a particular position, you should be accountable for your actions in that particular position.
Ms. Morrison.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Etienne. As a member of Reform Jersey, we pride ourselves in our manifesto. We have a very complex manifesto. We have 10 key pledges which have been carefully costed, and they have been designed for you. They have been designed to make your life easier and to help you in any way that we can. These pledges are not wishes. These are things that we can do if you trust us, if you vote for us, and you give us a chance. We will not let you down. We will follow all the promptings that we have had through our canvassing, all the conversations we have had, all the meetings we have had where we have discussed the needs of you, the people, the majority of the people, and all we need are your votes.
Mr. Ashe.
Well, Mike, I think that anybody elected to public office has to be fully accountable both for their actions and any decisions they take, and that's the bottom line of the whole issue. You have to be.
Ms. Freeman.
Hi, good evening, Mike. I think that accountability goes hand in hand with communication. I believe that at the moment the communication between the states and the public is rather poor. I believe that disengagement has happened as a result of people not being able to fully understand a lot of the systems which take place. I think especially our young people, it's reflected in a complete disengagement because they don't understand the system. What I would suggest is to hold accountability for the representatives in the states. It requires communication, and like I spoke about in my speech, building that bridge between the states and the public needs to happen, because at the moment there is a complete lack of understanding, and I think that contributes to not being able to hold people to account because we don't know who to hold to account. I believe that to further improve the levels of engagement, party politics is the way forward. I think that it enables people to place their values in a certain group of people. And of course, there are always going to be polarities, and I think that that's a good thing. I think that without those different opinions, debates can't happen. So I would always promote having debates and having conversations, having different opinions, because that is the best representative of the entire population of Jersey. Thank you.
Gentleman here.
Thank you. Alistair Mitchell. I've lived in the parish for over 25 years. Okay, the skate park was closed earlier this year to open on weekends and holidays only, with the final closure due in September. What will the candidates do to ensure momentum is kept up to deliver a right and proper facility sooner rather than later?
Deputy Panel.
Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. I know I did mention in my opening remarks that I'm very keen to pursue a sports activity centre at the Rockyer School. I've already discussed this with education, and obviously, like everything else, it's part of a capital expenditure fund on which there are many calls at the moment, but I have been saying for 6 years we need something east of the island, and I hope that would include a skate park. But obviously that would depend on the design of the whole thing. And I do accept that it's now a very respected and popular sport, and would hopefully pursue the consideration of that on this side of the island.
Ms. Morrison.
Yes, I I actually am a parent myself of 2 teenagers, and quite frequently the words that are mentioned at our house is, what can we do? There isn't anything to do. We live on a beautiful island, we have beautiful beaches, we have so many things to do, but there does seem to be a massive lack of things for the youth to do. And over the years we've noticed, there are issues, particularly in our area where we live. There's graffiti popping up, there's, a bit of vandalism here and there. And I always look at it and I think, well, it's not good they're doing this, and don't get me wrong, I don't approve of it, but they need something to stimulate them, to challenge them. They need to get outdoors. So many children are stuck behind computer screens. They're not interacting, and we need to work harder. And it's okay to promise a skate park. It's okay to promise funding. We have to guarantee it actually happens. We have to make sure the plans are seen right through to the end. And if I'm elected, I will do whatever I can to ensure this happens. I will make sure, as with my party, that we will fight for these changes to happen. We will fight for our teenagers to have something to do. We will fight for them to come off their computers and interact. It's so important living in a digital world that our children do engage outside of just a screen. It's very, very important. And I know so many of you want to see this happen, and I'm on your side.
Mr. Ashe.
Well, I went to the sport jersey presentation that they did the other morning, and it was very interesting and in a way worrying. 1 in 3 children leave primary school over here overweight now. And things like the skate park are great for people who don't want to play the traditional sports, don't want to play the football or rugby or cricket, although not so much cricket's played these days. But Steve Pallett, who obviously is the sports minister, he said to me their plans are well underway to replace that. They're getting a top designer in from the UK. And as he said, you can't just not get someone who isn't an expert. It's not something you can just get together and stick a bit of concrete up. You need to have someone who knows what they're doing, and they are putting that in place. And as long as the next states push it through, there will be one there.
And Ms. Freeman.
Hi, Alistair. I think that it is important to sustain momentum on this project. I think, it was spoken about 4 years ago and nothing has progressed since then. I am in agreement with the preferred site of being at Valdemar next to La Frigate. I think that we need to get the users of the skateboard facility out of this dark place which they're presented as being antisocial troublemakers. We need to give them more responsibility. They need to be involved with the project. We can allow them to manage the project themselves. I think this could transform the way that society sees these people as being, like I said, troublemakers. I think that if we give them the responsibility, listen to their opinions on the project, it can help bring together a feeling of inclusiveness and bring them back together as part of the wider community. Thank you.
Mr. Renniff.
You can probably tell that I am a skateboarder. I have been for nearly 50 years now. I'm absolutely behind a skate park project. It's important not just for skateboarders, but for the BMX riders, inliners and scooter riders as well. There are 4 proposed sites running from town out west. If the facility at the New North Quay closes on the 1st of September, I have in mind that there are skate ramps there that will need a new home, and it would be a good idea to pull them to this side of the island. So any skateboarders that want to discuss this, please get in touch with me, because I would like to see that happen.
Lady here.
Thank you. Andrew Pray, I'd like to ask you how much you all know about our community support team here in the parish.
Ms. Morrison.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Dupre. I've been out canvassing now for around 4 weeks, and I remember vividly on my very first day canvassing, I went to Le Marais Towers, and I spent 4 hours in Le Marais Towers for my first day. I encountered a number of individuals who I knew there was poverty in Jersey, but I didn't realise until I stepped into these homes just how struggling these people were. I realised very quickly that something needed to be done. I realised that I was in the prime position to be able to talk and to find out what I could do and how I could help them. I asked questions on how they were managing, how they were coping with their finances, and an overwhelming number of people commented on how they were having support from the parish. I said to them, how are you getting your shopping? How are you doing this? And the name Julie Martin popped up frequently. I was told, Julie's coming, she's going to come and help me with my shopping. And it made me feel very warm inside to know that despite these people's challenges, they're still having a link to the parish, they're still having the support that they need. And it's something which, if I'm elected, I would like to work and build on that foundation, and I would like to support the volunteers. I would like to be an active role, an active part in it. Thank you.
Mr. Ashe.
I think it comes across, tremendously well when you go around the doorsteps, particularly when I was in La Mare the other day, of the work the community scheme does. I was talking to Lynn Hind, who I think is here today as well, and they put in a tremendous amount of effort. It's almost a throwback to how Jersey was run before, where the parishes do a lot of the work and it's taken away from the central body. But it will still needs more funding, I think any community scheme needs to be looked at to be centrally funded as well. So I wouldn't just say that it has to be in the parish or substitute for what the states need to do.
Ms. Freeman.
I believe the community support team at this stage is fundamental. I think that the work that they do for particularly elderly residents who wouldn't otherwise have access or the ability to get hold of practical skills that they need, changing light bulbs or going to the shop. I think one of the agendas on the community support team, I believe, is how they can engage with younger families, because at the moment they don't reach out to that support network. And I think that it's up to us, it would be up to us as deputies to help come up with an idea, a plan on how we can access the younger families, who are struggling, who at the moment aren't even aware of the support team. I think that one of our pledges with the Reform Jersey manifesto is that we want to reform social security contributions to basically lower the cap, which limits the percentage on middle and low earners. I think that this could have a significant effect on reducing the poverty that a lot of low-income families are in, and who therefore need services like the Graces Trust. I think that if we go forward and create a fairer system, that the younger families can start to use the parish again. I think that the parish can possibly start introducing responsibilities again, because it creates that, like I spoke about in my speech, that human connection which we're missing now. Lots of families get lost in computer systems and they're not recognised and they're not known, their suffering isn't seen. So I think for me personally, I would love to get involved with the support team and use my skills and my experience with helping families and making decisions on their behalf. Thank you.
Mr. Reniff.
I understand that community support is an essential part of people's lives, that it helps them to cope, and I am a little bit overwhelmed by the scale of the need for this feature within the parish, and so it seems to me that an awful lot more needs to be done to support the support volunteers.
Thank you. Deputy Panel.
Thank you, Conatable, and thank you to Anne for your question. And I know the community support scheme well, and I know that 4 other parishes in the island have followed this example, which is fantastic. And it's lovely to see so many representatives of the support scheme here tonight. It's represented every third Thursday with a coffee morning in the parish for everybody to come along, which I try to attend. And it's a lovely arena, not for people just to meet, but also for something that is close to my heart, is the long-term care scheme. And we had officers from Social Security come here to speak to people from the community, brought in by the support scheme, who could try to speak to people in private about their own individual cases with long-term care. People don't want to speak across an audience about their private situation. And that was just one of the things that this parish can do, is to invite people in to explain the complicated laws, and ask questions, apart from meet each other and the additional help, of course, that the support scheme provide.
Another questioner. Lady at the back, I think. Hand up there. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Elizabeth Etienne. I'm happy to be a member of St Clement's Parish. However, a few years ago, I attended a seminar at West Park Pavilion, now destroyed, and the agreement at the end of it was that the what's the name of the people coming in? No. That immigration would be reduced to 325 people a year. Are the members of the panel aware of these figures? And if so, will the existing government at the time took no notice at all? Would you take notice of this number?
Mr. Ashe.
As I said on the radio the other day, and as you've just said, because the West Park Pavilion was around, immigration is not a subject, or population, perhaps we should put it in that way. It's been around for a while. It became a hot topic when we went through 80,000 people. It became a hot topic when we went through 90,000. It's now well through the 100,000. So it's been there for a while. It should have been addressed many years ago, and it wasn't. We do need some form of work permit put in. I think I would start by the seasonal workers. You come from, say, March till October, and then you go home. And I think that has to come in. Someone said, oh, well, you can't build a life here. Well, you're not asking people to build a life here. You're asking them to come, earn their money, and go. I work with a girl. Her husband goes from Jersey to Saudi Arabia. He works, he was in the RAF. He services planes out there. He goes out there. He comes back here. He has no desire to make his life in Saudi Arabia. He's doing it for the money. And so I don't see why we shouldn't make a start by introducing the seasonal workers' work permits as soon as we can.
Ms. Freeman.
The target of 325 a year has been exceeded yearly by over 700. That means over the past 4 years, there's been over 4,000 people coming into the island and staying. To resolve this, one of the pledges that Reform Jersey has put in their manifesto is that we need to introduce time-limited work permits, which means that for high-skilled workers, who we're always going to need at this stage, our surgeons, our construction workers, will come on a 5-year basis, which is on a rolling contract depending on need. For our low-skilled workers, whom the agriculture industry currently needs, as do hospitality, it will be a 1-year permit. That means that after 1 year, they're not eligible to stay. Now, on this scheme, that means that the 700 people who are qualifying past the 5-year period getting into qualifications would disappear. Therefore, going back to our target of 325, which is a sustainable amount, if it continues the way it has been, you know, we don't know what changes that could bring to the island and our housing market in particular. So we need to form a government which is going to be committed to keeping those targets, working with the Population Office and monitoring who is coming in and what they're doing. Thank you.
Mr. Renouf.
We were promised in the 1990s that the whole issue of immigration and population was going to be controlled, and the proposal was that it would be controlled by licensing the way that people could employ their staff. It caused problems for local employers because they weren't able to expand their workforces in order to take advantage of the opportunities that markets offered them. And it hasn't worked. It has not worked at all. I would like to see the whole problem, the whole issue being debated thoroughly so that everybody can offer their own solutions. I'm not altogether convinced that work permits is going to be anything other than yet another layer of control and red tape that is not going to be particularly effective when we have an economy that demands an awful lot of cheap labour come into the island for our needs. I would like to put the whole idea of a living wage back onto the table to be discussed, because if local people were attracted to the jobs that we import staff for, then perhaps we would solve the solution without yet another layer of control. Thank you.
Deputy Panel.
Thank you, Mrs. Etienne. I'm a great believer in don't set a target that you can't meet. 325 people immigrating here per year was never going to be achievable, as has been proved by the figures recently. I think we need to have some sort of flexibility. We do need to have work permits. I quite agree with the proposition that's being brought forward, but there needs to be flexibility as well in order that people can still come from UK possibly without one. And you look at the hospitality industry, for instance, and chefs are notoriously difficult to find in Jersey, so have to come from elsewhere. And if you suddenly have a very good chef after 4 years and then they have to go because the system is inflexible, that will not help the hospitality industry. So there has to be some sort of flexibility in this. But I do think the implication of work permits is it's good. I think it can be managed. Yes, the administration will be very high, but I think we have to find some way of making sure that people come here for a job that they have applied for, rather than people just turning up and hoping to find a job.
Ms. Morrison.
Thank you for your question, Mrs. Etienne. One of the things that I think is really quite obvious about the situation regarding population immigration is the fact that it also ties in why we have such a low voter turnout. We are promised things over and over again. We're promised the immigration is going to be cut down. We're promised we're going to have a hospital. We're promised so many things and they don't actually happen. So I feel we've had enough of promises that don't happen. We have we have a manifesto which outlines what we think is the way forward, and we think by increasing the minimum wage to £10 an hour by 2022, it will reduce the need to have people coming in from outside the island. We need to invest time, we need to invest money in apprenticeships for our local people, training people up, but to do that we have to pay them more. We have to be fair with our cost of living and the rent and all the things they have to pay. We have to pay them a fair wage. Not everyone is academic. Not everyone is going to go to university. There are plenty of people who do so well in skilled trades. We all need plumbers. We all need electricians. We need carpenters. We need gardeners. Every day of the week, we are looking for a phone book. We're looking online for people that can help us with our problems. Why can't we make their lives easier, pay them a decent wage? Then we won't have to keep on bringing more and more people in from outside. It's basic common sense. If you train up the people living locally, you don't need as many people from outside.
Further questions, gentlemen here?
Norman Sevray, I'm a resident in St Clements. Many elderly residents in the island have been looking after their children and grandchildren for many years, and now they find themselves asset rich and cash poor. I do believe the law in Jersey is you cannot borrow without having a fixed term repayment. How would you go about changing the law to get this change so that you could allow equity to release so some of these elderly people could now enjoy themselves after helping their children out with a bit of spare cash? Thank you.
Ms. Freeman.
I think that people should be entitled to access their equity release. I think that considering the situation that a lot of people are in, having to support their families for a longer period of time, especially people who are still housing their children after the age of 25 when they can't afford to buy their own homes and they're still living at home, still eating out the fridge, working in a job where they're not actually able to afford a deposit for an affordable house. I think that these problems can also be amended through some of our policies in our manifesto, such as putting a rental freeze on social housing. At the moment, it stands at 90% of the private sector, which against the UK, where it's 80%, is clearly unaffordable for a lot of people. Also, the minimum wage problem, lots of 18-year-olds coming out of school, going into a first-time job, can't afford at all to go and rent their own place, so they're staying at home. So I think that, yes, to be able to access the money that you need when it's your time is essential. But to get to that stage, I think we need to start implementing these changes to avoid that being a discussion in the future. Thanks.
Mr. Renniff.
Absolutely agree that people should be able to release equity from their assets. I think that something needs to be done to make sure that it can be done quickly, because when you need this equity release, it's usually because there's a very, very pressing need. So I would really like to support anything that can be done to help there.
Deputy Panel.
Yes, Mr. Sivery, I agree that a lot of people are asset rich and cash poor, and would also support some sort of equity release system. The amount of young people who are now still living at home, I agree, is a lot more. It seems to have gone a circle, whereas young people always used to live at home until such time as they went away and got married. Now they seem to be living because they can't afford to get on the property ladder. And I appreciate that is a considerable problem. But the expectation, I think, of being a homeowner at a very young age is also difficult to deal with. I mean, that's been there since the Margaret Thatcher era. So I do believe that if parents want to help their children further, the same applies with further education. It's now with the grants coming in for that. But a lot of us in this room will have had to pay for our children for further education without any support. So it's a difficult one to answer. But yes, I think people should be able to access equity against their properties.
Ms. Morrison.
Yes, thank you for your question. One idea that we have would be to ask Andium to set up a scheme to buy houses and give them life enjoyment for a smaller property at a social rented rate. One of the things that I've noticed, actually, I was canvassing this week, and I bumped into a lady. She was really struggling. She had a very fulfilling career in the finance industry, and she also had worked in the care industry, and she had a child who was a grown-up child who is struggling quite a lot financially, and she's found herself having to support this child because she's earning above the threshold, that's the word, sorry about that. Because she's earning above the threshold, she wasn't able to access any help. She has tried at Social Security, and there's absolutely nothing she can do. And this child is now having a baby, and she is having to support this child. And I feel that it's very unfair if people have been, working all their lives and they have saved, that they are having to pay, full rent in Andium. They're having to pay a fortune in rent. They're having to look after grandchildren, all the extra pressures of living on an already expensive island. I feel we have to support these people, and we have to make sure that as a party, we're not just supporting the lower incomes, we also support the middle incomes. And I think that's absolutely crucial that we do this.
Mr. Ashe.
Well, Norman, you've got 5 out of 5, because I fully agree with changing the law for equity release as well. Obviously, we do have lifetime enjoyment, but that's very different because you're getting paid a minimal amount for what your property is actually worth. So equity release is the way to go. It will enable grandparents to provide deposits for their grandchildren, or indeed their children in some cases. So yeah, 100% behind it.
Okay. Gentleman standing at the back.
Hello, good evening. I'm Kit Ashton. I live in the far west of God's Own Parish at Beach Crescent. I've got a short quote. I promise it is short, so I'm going to read my question if that's all right. So my question is this. Given the shocking and quite frankly damning evidence uncovered and summarised by the recent Health and Social Security Panel's report following its examination of the challenges of living on a low income in Jersey, and I quote, "The growing use of food banks in Jersey is a consequence of increasing pressures on people living in relative low income and the widening income inequality gap which has been highlighted in the Jersey Household Income Distribution Survey. And given the fact that 1 in 4 of all households are now living in relative low income, including hundreds of hard-working families who are really struggling and often barely managing in what should be an affluent island, do the candidates agree that some of the £10 million of cuts to the support for some of the most vulnerable people in our society have done real damage? And what, if elected, would they do to reverse this?"
Mr. Renouf.
Yes, I agree. I agree absolutely. I mean, why can't we talk about this if we are a rich island? There is no need to put pressure on the people who are least able to resist that pressure. We need to talk more. We need to find solutions to this, and I believe we can do it together rather than just by expecting the states to do something when they're clearly not prepared to do what we need them to do.
Deputy Panel.
Thank you, Kit, for your question. Of course, I'm well aware of the Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel's low-income report and the recommendations that followed it. There is a very, very secure safety net in the form of income support on this island, which, as everybody in the audience will know, took over from Parish Welfare in 2008. And it is a safety net. It's there to help people when they can't, for some reason or another, look after themselves. And I'm aware that equally quite a few of the charities mentioned in the report didn't answer some of the surveys, so it wasn't an overall equal report back. And you referred to the £10 million worth of cuts. Every department in the government had to make savings in order to fill the prospective £145 million deficit, which was forecast if we didn't do something to address that. So from the savings that Social Security Department made, these were made to target the benefits in a better fashion than they were originally. Some of them, sorry?
Sorry, we can't have a debate. Can you let the Deputy answer the question?
We went through all of the income support benefits, of which there are 14, which are taxpayers' money, and we targeted the ones that we felt that were most needed by the people in need in the society.
Okay. Ms. Morrison.
Thank you for your question. According to the Future Jersey report, in 2017, 1 in 5 people reported some degree of difficulty financially. If we look to 2018, I'm sure this figure has increased. I personally do not believe we should have ever even suggested taking away the OAP bonus. Before we look at something at this level, we should have looked at people who could actually afford to manage without it. I have been and I have spoken to people who have nearly been in tears because they have had their Christmas bonus taken away. These people, some of them are suffering with physical and mental health conditions. They cannot leave their house. They have a little bit of enjoyment once a year, and this was stripped away from them. How can we justify taking from the poor and the vulnerable to line the pockets of the rich? How can we as a society sit and accept and believe that this is actually fair? It isn't fair. At Reform Jersey, we believe in fairness. We believe in a fair society where everyone gets to enjoy a comfortable and a happy lifestyle.
Mr. Ashe.
As I said in my little preamble earlier, one of my core beliefs is that we have to look after those in genuine need. And there does appear that there are people in the island who are in genuine need. And I think when the states reconvene, that should be right at the top of their priorities to look into that. I think they can start with the Caritas report, which was commissioned by one of the Catholic charities. If you get a chance to read it, it makes very interesting reading. If you start with that as your basis, and let's try and get to the bottom of the whole problem and sort it out.
And Ms. Freeman.
We of Reform Jersey fundamentally believe that cuts to the vulnerable is completely uncalled for, and we need to find more suitable ways to balance out these figures. An Oxera report recently looked at the effect of raising the minimum wage, which is something that we've pledged to do. Now, of course, there are going to be adverse effects, but in the long run, the effect on the economy will see a boost in spending of 2.4 million. Now, what this minimum wage will do for the majority of islanders is see them come out of that poverty. Now, what we mean by poverty is the effect it has is corrosive. So we see increase in poor mental health. So that puts pressure on other services which aren't being funded properly through poor regulation of our income tax system, for example. Now, reforming something like this, making small alterations, can see massive improvements in the long run. I think if you were to read our manifesto, you'll see that everything we're doing isn't going to cause massive upheaval. It's small alterations which will have domino effect in the long run. But our core values, what we pledge for, is a fair system where vulnerable people aren't seen as easy targets of saving money. Thank you.
Lady here.
Hi, my name's Jackie Delahaye and I live in St Clement's for most of my life. And sorry I'm overtaking again as I did the last one. Immigration's already been mentioned, but what I'd like to know, I know there's one member of the panel who's actually doing something about it at the moment, but I would like to know what the rest of them think about the people that are coming over to Jersey without jobs and taking the jobs from our children.
I think that question may have been answered, but if quickly we want to... Deputy Panel.
Thank you, Jackie. This does happen sometimes. There's a problem with a lot of the having been involved with the back to work. A lot of the people in Jersey don't wish to do the hospitality jobs. They don't wish to do the potato picking jobs. And I know from a lot of hospitality areas that people from Jersey will be happy doing the jobs from Monday to Thursday, but they're not seen for dust at the weekend because they want to be with their mates. And they just don't want to be on the coaties picking potatoes. So there has to be an influx of people who are prepared to do those jobs. And that's historic in Jersey. There always have been. And I think what we need to do, we've got a very good trackers scheme at the moment, which is an apprentice scheme run by the Education Department, training people up in jobs that are needed in Jersey so that we don't have to have the situation that Mrs. Delahaye describes. We are very lacking in people qualified in IT and technical skills, so we need to be doing that. We, as I mentioned in an earlier answer, have a shortage of very competent chefs. I know from several places I've been today canvassing, we don't have window fitters. There's only so much training you can do, and there's only so much in the construction industry as well as other industries that you can find the qualified people here, in which case you have to bring them in, and they are on short-term contracts, and with work permits it will be easier to identify the people to fill those jobs.
Ms. Morrison.
Thank you for the question, Mrs. Delahaye. I think it actually starts a lot earlier than teenagers. I think it starts in primary school. I think it starts in the message that we give our children when we force them into a curriculum where they're doing things which they don't always feel comfortable with doing. They're forced down from this time now, we have a test-based education system. We are judged by our test results. Not everyone performs well in a test. This goes through our childhood, through our adolescence, where we are performing for tests. And I feel that if we were to be more flexible with our curriculum for those children that don't perform well on tests for whatever the reason, whether they have complex needs or they just can't perform well in exams. I feel if we could allow them the opportunity to be themselves, I feel we would have a greater number of children that would go into IT, that would go into the careers that we're bringing people in to do. But I really feel it starts with the education system. I really feel that's where it starts. And I feel we have to give these children the option to flourish, give them the opportunity to grow. Don't stifle them and don't set them up for failure, because if they're not, it's basically like pounding a square peg into a round hole. If they're not going to be academic and they're not going to be able to cope with exams, don't put them through that. Don't cause them anxiety. Don't cause them to have a breakdown. It's so hard and so stressful being a teenager as it is. They don't need the extra pressure. I really think it starts at school.
Mr. Ashe.
Yeah, I'd just like to back up what Susie said there, actually. About that some of these kids don't want to actually do certain jobs or certain tasks. I was talking to someone the other day and they said, oh, there's nothing for my son to do in the holidays to make any money. I said, well, what about picking potatoes? Oh, you can't ask him to do that. Well, why not? Loads of people in Jersey did it for years and years and years. Why can't you ask people to do that? And as far as education is concerned, you don't have to be greatly educated to do that either. So. But coming on to the other serious point, I don't think we do enough for the school leavers. I think we could work a lot more with banks or all the employers to perhaps even give them a little tax break for 6 months to bring someone in. You know, the states pay the first £100 of their salary, something like that, to get local companies in, to give these people a chance for 6 months, prove their worth, get that vital work experience and get a foot on the ladder.
Ms. Freeman.
I think incentivising today's teenagers to go and pick potatoes is probably one of the hardest things our government might have to try and do. I think that's a problem, a cultural problem. I think today we live in an age where kids want the latest iPhone and, you know, they want new clothes, and by working on a farm they're not going to get those things at the current wage that the agricultural industry pays. I think what we need to do, one of the current problems I've heard from a lot of business owners is that they see a lot of people coming for interviews from the Back to Work scheme who are totally inappropriate for the role, and both parties know that they're inappropriate, but part of the agreement with the Back to Work scheme is that they have to attend a certain number of interviews a week to get their allowance. Now, all I see that doing is wasting both people's time, especially the business owners. Now, what I think we need to see is a clearer register of who is unemployed currently on the island, what skills they have, and what jobs are needed. So by looking at the two things together, we can see, okay, what people will fit into which job. So it's a clearer picture of the jobs we have available and the people we have who are currently unemployed. Thanks.
Mr. Reniff.
I grew up on a farm and I was always led to believe that local people were not prepared to do the work. They wouldn't go out into the fields when it was raining. As I've got older, I found out there are an awful lot of people who would prefer to be outside rather than shut up in an office. So it's got nothing to do with incentivizing people to take these jobs, but perhaps the pay that's going to pay rent has a little bit to do with it.
Thank you. Any further questions? Lady here.
Bernadette Cooper. I've been back in the parish 4.5 years, and I have picked daffodils in St Clement. Very character building, I have to say, in all weathers. What I wanted to actually ask you all about, since I've been back in the parish, what I have noticed, and I'm surprised nobody's mentioned it, is the whole-scale development of luxury housing. And it amazes me, 2 hotels have gone in recent years and been replaced by beautiful luxury apartments in one hand and other seafront apartments and lovely houses and everything else. And as a mother of young people who are desperately trying very hard to raise a deposit for affordable housing, what are you, if I am to vote for you, what will you do to stop the whole-scale development of luxury housing in a small parish like St Clement's, but also in the island generally?
Ms. Morrison.
Mrs. Cooper, thank you for your question. I really do. My heart goes out to you because I know the challenges that we are facing. I live in St Clement's myself, and I see the developments, and it makes me sad because I know I have children that are going to want to buy eventually, and I don't think they're ever going to be able to afford to buy. And I see this, and I feel we do need more affordable housing on the island. That's something we absolutely do need. But at the moment, I feel St Clement's is taking everything. I think we're taking the affordable housing, we're taking the luxury housing, we're just taking far too much. And we have another 11 parishes. Why does it all have to go in St Clement? The other parishes can step in. They can share the burden of the properties. We do not have to have it. And if I am elected to represent you, I will be making sure that my voice is heard, that your voice is heard. You don't want any more buildings in St Clement. I don't want any more buildings in St Clement. We don't want any more buildings in St Clement. We should, as ratepayers, we should be consulted in the process, and we should know what's happening, and nothing should be built until we have had a chance to approve of it. And if we don't think it should happen, it shouldn't happen. That's the way it should be.
Mr. Ashe.
I agree with Samantha there. I don't think we really want any more building in St Clement, particularly on the greenfield sites, and as I've said, I would oppose any attempt to do so. I do feel there is a chance of doing things in St Helier, funnily enough, because we've got the finance centre that's taking an awful lot of office space now. And when they finish the other two, everybody has moved towards the waterfront. Now that leaves a lot of empty office space. There's plenty of empty water space. That leaves empty office space in St Helier. We've seen the old UBS building already put into flats. But I'd like to see planning only give planning permission for those to become first-time buyer flats, because that is our major problem.
Ms. Freeman.
The need for housing is going to be ever increasing if our population isn't managed, as we've spoken about before. But I think that one of the first things we can try and do is put an empty property tax onto those properties which are currently sat empty when there are people in need. I think it's interesting to see that recently on their annual business report, Andium Homes have announced that they're actually doubling their target from building 1,000 homes on the island by 2021 to now being 2,000 homes. Now they have no plans for where these homes are going to be. So priority of protecting our green space is going to be high on the agenda, I'm afraid, because we're going to be the first place that they're going to be looking at. I think that their new homes that they've put on Samurai Nurseries is a good scheme. I think they've put 40 homes which are classed as affordable for first-time buyers. They were swiped up as soon as it was announced, basically. I think 125 people were interested in buying those houses. I think that, to balance the need and the protection of green space is going to be something that we all need to keep an eye on in the chamber, whoever gets elected. Thanks.
Mr. Reniff.
The availability of homes for people to buy is one side of the problem, but homes are very, very expensive to rent as well. It is all part of the same problem that the value of property in the island is out of pace with what people can afford. The disparity between luxury homes that are being developed on hotels and on private sites as opposed to the affordable homes that are being developed by Andium is so noticeable. We have seen an infill in Lascay, which has taken away the green space that were available for locals to use, and that is going to be replaced somewhere else. And we're not having the discussions that allow all of us to work out the direction we want the parish to go in. And I really, really would like to see direct democracy just on that one issue alone. Thank you.
Deputy Panel.
Thank you. Bernadette Cooper asked about the increased building of luxury housing and the development of 2 hotels in the parish. It's once again, it's a circle. People owning hotels are not getting the visitors to that particular area anymore, so you can quite understand that they would want to develop their hotels from their point of view and into luxury apartments. Luxury is a quote-unquote term, but you find that a lot of people are also downsizing from quite large houses, either to move and leave the larger houses for their children to move into, and taking up these luxury quote-unquote apartments. So there is a need for them. As far as any more building in St Clement, I agree with what other speakers have said, that we've taken absolutely more than our fair share. And I've spoken to Andium about this. They have no plans whatsoever to do any more building in St Clement, further than the Samurai Nurseries development. And I've also spoken to the housing minister, the current housing minister, who is also totally unaware of any more plans for any further development in St Clement. So that is some sort of reassurance. They wouldn't have told me otherwise if they felt otherwise. There are 1,000 people on the housing gateway waiting for social housing, so we have to find it from somewhere. But yes, it certainly should not all be in St Clement.
Any further questions? See a gentleman with his hand up there by the window.
Good evening. Tony Moretta. I feel a relative newcomer at only 2 years here in St Clement. But we haven't really talked tonight about the fact that in order to afford all the things we'd like to do, we need a strong economy. We've only seen today the Chief Minister and the External Relations team fight off yet another ill-informed attack on the finance industry. I'd like to ask the candidates a question. If elected, what would you do to contribute to the protection and the strengthening of the Jersey economy?
Mr. Ashe.
I think, firstly, we do have to look at diversifying our economy, because obviously we are very finance industry centric. It is the main industry. But in saying that, the people who are attacking the finance industry is absolute madness. Because if you lose your main industry, you are gone. Go and look at the coal mining industries of South Wales and see what happened to the communities there when they lost their main industry. So we have to protect the finance industry as much as is possible. It is now one of the best regulated finance industries in the world, right? In the world. So all this stuff you receive, put in the papers about this is being done here and this isn't, most of it is scurrilous nonsense. So let's get behind the finance industry and support it for everybody's sake in Jersey. Thank you.
Ms. Freeman.
In terms of protecting the finance industry, of course, we value its importance here. It's the highest earner of GDP. I think that at the moment, securing and sustaining our constitutional autonomy at the moment is very important. There are conversations with the politicians in the UK about amending our fully transparent register of beneficial ownership, which would involve a public view on offshore ownership, basically, and companies here in Jersey who invest would not be, that would put a lot of our business at risk in the finance. So we need to sustain our autonomy in regulating our own laws with that. However, the finance industry is changing, and we will see automation and technology pushing out jobs which people are currently doing. As a result of that, I believe that we need to further invest in our digital sector. I think it's an area which we haven't seen a lot of improvements in so far. We have our digital hub here, but I think that we need to invest a lot more in the training of individuals in that area. I think that it needs to be an area which kids at school are promoted to go into. I think that it's brilliant at the moment that kids are learning to code, and it goes above me. I don't know anything about it, but so there are things which we can refocus our attentions on, which will see our future economy benefit from. I think we can be a world leader in our digital sector, and I think that is something that we should focus on. I also think that tourism is still a very strong thing, although it's often overlooked now. I think that we should keep, because Jersey is an amazing place. It's a very unique place, and we forget that sometimes. We focus on finance, but for me, I think rejuvenating Fort Regent is going to be something that I really want to push forward with. I think that it's sat there being unused for what it could be, and there's huge potential there which could generate our tourist industry and make us a place worth coming to still. Thank you.
Mr. Reniff.
Welcome to the parish. I think the greatest vulnerability to our finance industry comes from the UK rather than here in Jersey. The reason that people in the UK invest a lot of money in Jersey is because their tax laws allow it. And so I think an awful lot of the attack on the offshore finance industry should be more readily rebuked by pointing out that it is the UK tax laws that allow this to happen. There's a different side to a different answer that will go with this as well. We used to be very, very light on our feet in this island. We did have the ability to see an opportunity and chase it. We've seen it in agriculture. With the potato market, tomatoes that came and went, the Jersey cow. We've seen it in tourism with a heyday in the 60s. We are now riding on the crest of the wave that is given to us by finance. But we are now very, very stiffly regulated. It is very difficult for employers to increase their workforce. We have to apply for that to happen. And I think that we have perhaps boxed ourselves in and are now stifling entrepreneurship that would help us to diversify in the future.
Deputy Panel.
And thank you, Tony, and you're absolutely right. A strong economy is vital, and so is productivity. We must protect the finance industry, as others have said, and the UK attack, again, I'm not sure that's the right word, but on the beneficial ownership has been diverted by the attendance of the Chief Minister and the External Relations Minister. They have no legislative effect on us, on our constitution, but pressure could very much be put on in other ways. So I think a very proactive move to stop this was essential. We do have the most extraordinarily transparent and well-regulated finance industry over here, which needs to be maintained. But we've got to be very careful that we still remain attractive to the finance industry, because it's so easy to move now, whereas people used to come to Jersey because of its beauty and its attraction. It still is, of course, but it's very easy to operate a financial institution from anywhere, Luxembourg, Singapore. It doesn't have to be in one place. So we have to make very, very sure that we stick with our transparency, our regulation, and know that finance industry is welcome here, not to make it the be-all and end-all of our existence. As somebody else has mentioned, diversity, we need that in other sectors, but we do need to protect the finance industry and make sure that we welcome them here.
Ms. Morrison.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Moretta, and welcome to St. Clement. I just wanted to actually touch on how fantastic the job you're doing with Digital Jersey, and I really feel as a parent, my children, I've got 2 children who are into coding, and they're starting to pick up coding classes after school. They have coding classes. I know that you offer classes at Digital Jersey, and I think that's absolutely brilliant that you're tapping into this local talent and you're supporting it. And I think that's the way forward for our generation. I think that's the way forward for a lot of children that really get a lot of interest out of that. I feel one thing that's probably been overlooked throughout the campaign is Reform's Jersey's take on finance. It's speculated that we don't care about finance, that we're a socialist party. We just want everyone to have what they want, and we don't care about finance. That's actually very untrue. We do, as a party, understand we need finance. We do understand it's an absolutely crucial part of our island. We rely on finance, but we need to diversify in so many different areas. We could have a university in Jersey. We could do so many things. We, as a parish specifically, why don't we have a St Clement's Beach Festival? Why don't we do some more things, you know, to get us together as a community? We could have a brilliant time. St Brellard's do it. Why can't St Clement do it? There's lots of different ideas that we could do as a community to support the finance industry and to support ourselves at the same time. And I think as a community we can do this.
Gentleman here.
My name's Neil Ginnis. I'm a resident of St Clement. My eldest daughter turns 16 on election day and gets to vote for the first time. So I've got a simple question. Why should she vote for one of you? What do you offer a 16-year-old first-time voter? Freeman.
I think the first thing that comes to my head is that it's representation. I think that turning 16 and being able to vote is an important thing, and I think that to be able to stand with someone's beliefs and convictions with what we're saying and understand them at that age is quite a feat, because I don't think I would have been able to. I think that if I were to be elected, it would give you someone who you can look to and directly talk to. I'd be happy to meet you on a regular basis, and I feel like I could be able to be a voice of the younger generation and help improve that engagement further. So, yeah, thank you.
Mr. Renouf.
I've got 3 children myself, and very often they have expressed the difficulty to find anything that's representative on offer in the States. It's one of the reasons that I feel very strongly that we should have direct democracy. It is not a proposal that comes from policy. It is about the nuts and bolts, the way that our democratic system should work. And so I would like to see support that is widespread for direct democracy, and that perhaps this will engage young people who just don't see that they're represented by any other way.
Deputy Panel.
I think it's a very difficult question to answer, I have to say. I think the government, states of Jersey, are doing a lot more now to educate children. The younger, the year 5 children in schools now go to the States Assembly and are taught through the history of the States Assembly and taught how to run their own small debate. We also have a youth assembly for the 17 and 18-year-olds, the sixth formers. And I have to say, having attended a few of those, that the youth assembly and the people who take part are far more coherent at any sort of debate than the current states members. Their questions are succinct and their debates are very good, and they also bring up very, very relevant topics. So there is some going on, but not enough. I don't think young people really have, not their fault, but just because it's not available to them enough, teaching in schools of what politics is about. I mean, there aren't courses in schools to teach that. And so how can you expect a 16-year-old who is lucky enough to have a vote? I mean, people should be interested and able to vote at 16, but how do you expect them to choose when there's not necessarily the education to back it up? And that's not criticising anybody, it's just saying that we should do more to do that. Thank you.
Ms. Morrison.
Thank you for the question. I'm a mother of 2 teenagers myself, and throughout this week I've actually spoken to 2 teenagers. I've been into their homes, I've sat down and I've discussed politics with them, I've discussed their views, and something which occurred to me when I was speaking to them is just how actively involved they are in our local politics. For the first time, these teenagers are able to vote, and they looked excited. They actually were interested and engaged in what I was saying. And it kind of made me think that if I am fortunate enough to be your representative, to be your deputy, I would like to have, I know we have an idea of parish surgeries, which I think would be brilliant, but I also think we could have a specific one for the young people. I think we could have a regular event, maybe once a month, where they can come and meet up, and we can get maybe a representative from the Yes Project, someone to come in and help them, any questions they may have. And if they have anything that they'd like to feed back to me, which I can feed back to the States, I think it's so vital. We're giving these young people the vote, but we also need to give them the support once they've had their vote. We need to continue their engagement. We need to keep them actively engaged in local politics. So when they get to the stage where they're a little bit older, they still keep turning out and voting. They keep an active role in the community. And I think that's where it starts, I think, while they're young.
Mr. Ashe.
Firstly, I think it's great that your 16-year-old daughter is taking an interest and is looking to vote. So many don't, and it's brilliant that she is. Why should she vote for me? That's difficult. Obviously, there's my natural boyish good looks and charm. I mean, that's... But that aside, I would advise her to read my flyer, where it does actually state that I believe in a lot of policies for the young, getting the young into jobs. I will back the university scheme, which has already been launched, but will need further support because it's only funded for so much. That would be about it, really. I couldn't really add to that. I think the university is very important, the education's important, and getting young people into jobs is very important.
I think I saw a lady at the back there, yes?
Hello, my name is Sian Waring-Jones and I've lived in the parish for 12 years. We've heard a lot this evening about immigration, we've heard about affordable housing, we've just heard mention of new funding for university fees and maintenance grants. I'd like to ask the panel how we might encourage those youngsters who do go off the island to university to actually come back here and work for us.
Mr. Renouf.
It's going to need diversity of opportunity if they are to be tempted to come back. There is work being done to offer the education to people for the industries that we have in the island, but when we start bringing skills in from outside to do other jobs at the expense of our local skills, that just seems to be a little bit strange to me. I think really if we are going to encourage people to come back, we need to have the entrepreneurship that's going to be able to attract them with new opportunities, and we're not doing enough of that.
Deputy Panel.
Thank you, Mrs. Waring-Jones. The university fees scheme, as Mr. Renouf has just said, Mr. Ashe anyway, is funded for a certain amount of time. It will have to go into the next medium-term financial plan to keep it supported, which is quite a considerable amount of money to find. To encourage young people to come back to Jersey, remember South Africa had a scheme where if you were paid for your university elsewhere, then you were compelled to come back to South Africa and work for 3 or 4 years, whatever your university thing is. Any of these schemes are very good as long as they're enforceable, and it's like the university debts that grow in the UK. If people can't pay them back, then they're just waived. So if you can't enforce the scheme, then don't bring it in the first place. To encourage people to come back, again, is job diversity, and depending on what their skill is, and certainly if it's anything digital, financial, or IT, then there are many jobs here that need people to fill them. So it depends on what their particular skill set is, and certainly they should be encouraged back here, but I think everybody would agree that a university is not just an education, it's a sort of whole experience of life. And whilst I fully appreciate the University of Jersey, based at Highlands, which is a fantastic setup there at the moment, a lot of university is an enhancement or learning about life, and I think a lot of people straight out of university would want to carry on somewhere else, so it's very difficult to bring them back.
Ms. Morrison.
Thank you for the question. I think we have to look at this in a very practical level. I think the bottom line is we have to make it affordable for them. It's all very good, say we have to do this and that, but at the end of the day, if they can't afford to come back and they can't afford to live here, they're not going to return. We need to sort something out about the sky-high rents for a start. No one is going to be able to come back and have to be able to afford to eat, pay rent, pay bills. It's got to come down. We have to start, and we have to start soon. We have to lower the price of the rent. We have to lower the price of the food. Otherwise, we're not going to encourage anyone to come back. We have to work so much harder. We have to protect our young people. We have to nurture their talent. And it's going to mean there's some sacrifices when it comes to sorting out our absolutely appalling record at the moment with high rents. That's the one thing that I've had over and over again when I've spoken to people. They can't afford food. They can't afford rent. It's all too much. And if there's anyone in this room who's sitting here and says, I can afford that, well, you're lucky. You're very, very lucky, because I can tell you the majority of the people I've spoken to, they cannot.
Mr. Ashe.
I don't think we should get too hung up on whether people come back, to be honest. I think the main thing we're trying to give those children is a chance. And by going to university, they have that chance. If they then go on to achieve great things in the world away from Jersey by the chance we've given them, well, then that's great.
I agree. The prospect of going to university is in itself a great opportunity. I think regardless of whether they return or not, it's going to be benefiting people around the world. I think so in that case, we can't control whether they return or not. In my experience, and based on my immediate friendship group, for example, a lot of people don't return to Jersey because at the moment there aren't opportunities to have fun. Now, that means going out night clubbing, which young people want to do. They don't want to go home at 2 o'clock in the morning. They want to go home at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I think reviewing the licensing laws needs to be kind of updated. I think that would give them more incentive to come back, to be quite honest. If we want them to come back, then that would keep them here. I think, of course, it comes into affordable housing. They can't afford to live on their own. There aren't in the UK, it's common to do house shares. But over here, that's not seen as such an availability. It's either you live in a one-bedroom flat and pay over £1,000 a month, or you stay at home. So I think the empty property tax would see those sort of households become house shares for young people. I think that reforming the income tax system as well would see an improvement to their earnings. Under our policy, reducing the marginal rate by 1% would see a tax freeze or a tax cut for 95% of income taxpayers. So if they do return, they'll be earning that little bit more money to enable them to sustain a happier way of living. But yeah, incentivising them to come back is a... Yeah, I think it's going to be an issue about having fun and giving them opportunities, creative opportunities, I'm afraid. So, yeah, thank you.
Gentleman here by the window. Yes, you, sir.
Good evening. My name is Brian Beeson. I've lived in the parish for 4 years. Absolutely love it. My question is, it's very saddening to hear that there's poverty in this parish. And what makes it even sadder is the expenditure that the states are going through at the moment. Millions and millions and millions of pounds. And my question is it sustainable? Or will the current policies end up bankrupting this island? Because we've never before had to borrow money to live. And the way we're going now, we're forgetting the people that live here, and we're borrowing money just to glamorise huge buildings and vanity, really. It's vanity spending. And I just wanted to ask, do the panel think it's a sustainable way to run this island?
Deputy Panel.
Thank you, Mr. Bisson. I don't like or adhere to the word poverty. I prefer relative low income, because that's why we have an income support system, is to catch people in the safety net so there isn't poverty. You're talking about £1 million of expenditure and borrowing money, the only reason we would ever have, or at the moment will do, borrow money is for the build of the new hospital. That is the only one. And I'm not knocking that, it's just saying that that's what we're borrowing so much money for, and it is the biggest capital expenditure this island has ever done. And we need to get on with it. The current hospital will not be fit for purpose in 5 or 10 years' time, and we need to have a new one. And that's why we will have to borrow the money as opposed to using up the whole of the rainy day fund, the strategic reserve fund, to do it, because that is now in quite a good place, and we need that for contingencies, which is why it's there. And the expenditure of millions of pounds is absolutely correct, but that incorporates the now grant-funded education. It will incorporate, hopefully, a redirection of Fort Regent. There's a new arrivals hall at the airport. All of these are enormous capital funding expenditures and are resulting because so little has been done in the past 40 years or so. So we're picking up, what has not been done and now needs to be done.
Ms. Morrison.
I would like to disagree. I don't think it is called low income. I think it's called no income for some people, because some people have nothing left at the end of the month. Some people have their income support, which covers their rent. I've seen people with physical and mental health conditions in the Murray Towers. All their income support covers their rent. They have nothing left. They then have to go to the dentist and they have to pay back Social Security for their dental treatment. So you tell me these people have got a low income. They have no income. No income at all. And I think this, living on an island, a wealthy island, to say that there are people that have no income, it isn't right. It isn't right at all. People fall through the safety net. We may have an income support system, but how many people do you know who have fallen through that safety net? How many people do you know who are struggling to survive? All this money that has been wasted, 26 million, not a brick laid on our hospital. This money could have been going towards those struggling people. This money could have been spent in so many other ways. But no, we are still having a situation where people are living in poverty with no incomes.
Mr. Ashe.
You mentioned there, Brian, vanity projects, and I think it's a good word. I don't think the hospital is a vanity project. It's just been badly mismanaged. It's money that should have been saved. It does need to go ahead, and hopefully it'll go ahead fairly soon. We do have vanity projects. We had a steam clock. I think people might remember that. That was not good. And there's also there's a cycle path that now links Millbrook and the Vic in the Valley. And normally I'm all in favour of getting to pubs quickly, and I think it's a good idea. Now, I told a girl at work this, and she said, I think it's a great thing. She said, I love that cycle path. She says, I use it every morning. She said, do you know, normally I'm the only person on it. Millions that costs. And when we haven't got much money, should we be spending millions on something like that? So we do have to cut down on some of the vanity projects that are going on, yes.
Ms. Freeman.
I am tired of focusing on what hasn't been done, what has been spent, what has been wasted. I think that it's time to focus on what we're going to do now, what stage we're at now, what money is going to be spent and where and how. I think that working as a team, I think party politics is the way forward for Jersey. I think that coming together in the chamber, we'll be able to work together more efficiently. I think that it will stop disagreements being held and time being wasted because we all agree on the same momentum. I think that silos need to be broken down and the culture of blame needs to stop. I think that it's unproductive and we want to promote a government that is transparent on its spending. We want to start showing annual reports on our progress so that the public are aware of what we've done each year instead of coming to the end of 4 years and then looking back on everything that hasn't been done. I think it's like I said, it's unproductive. So I think that there are ways forward with the hospital, for example, involving the workers who actually work in the hospital, getting their point of view is really important, which I don't think has been put across. So reopening workforce modernisation negotiations on their pay, I think that they haven't been listened to, and we need to listen to the doctors and nurses on their stance on the hospital. At the same time, I think that we need a public service ombudsman who will represent the public and the services which they receive to be able to come back to the States with the actual opinions on the people, so we can listen to them with a generous and honest opinion from that. Thank you.
Mr. Renouf.
I don't think it is possible to argue that cuts need to be made in some areas because we can't afford to do things, and at the same time spend vast sums in other areas because it needs to happen. If the hospital needed to happen, it would have happened in 2014 when £295 million was voted for it. 4 years later, we're still waiting, and £30 million in consultancy apparently is being used up. When I went along to the display at Liberation Wharf to see the new plan for the hospital, I overheard someone say that the 30 million had been spent on counting traffic and things. It's not a very confident way of putting over such a huge project. Apparently we need a bigger hospital because our population has grown. I've not actually seen anything definite that tells us we're getting more beds in this new hospital, and still it isn't being built.
A further question? Gentleman at the back.
David Nervsey, I live in Green Island. We've spoken about teenagers or youngsters going to university. Do the panel support a taxpayer, and I happen to be one, and I'm also a pensioner, supporting people who are earning between 100 and 150,000 a year? Do they really think we should be supporting these people? Thank you very much.
Ms. Morrison.
As a party member of Reform Jersey, we have brought proposals to help fund university fees. We believe that our children do deserve to have the best start in life. We believe that so many children may not go because their parents cannot afford it. We also have to take into account the people, like I have spoken to this week, they're still earning a substantial amount, but they have other things to consider as well. And they still have to pay, when they get to university, they still have to pay their living costs. They still have to have their rent paid for them. They have other issues. It's not just as straightforward as saying that it's only paying for their tuition fees. There's still other issues to consider. They have to also travel backwards and forwards to see parents and see their families. So we have to consider this in the situation as well. And it's something that I think as a community, as the government needs to communicate more with us. The electorate, they have to communicate more. But I believe that all these proposals, they can be discussed. They can be debated further. It's not a case of we suggested this as a party. We are happy to talk and to hear your views, and if you feel that something is incorrect, we're happy to listen to that and we're happy to take it on board. It's not a black and white question at the moment, but we are prepared to listen to what you have to say.
Mr. Ashe.
Yes, I think firstly we have to accept that there should be no reason that a child in Jersey can't go to university simply because his parents can't afford it. That would be unacceptable. I think the scheme was slightly rushed through to get through before the end of the session, and I think because we haven't properly fully funded it, it will have to be revisited. I think as part of that revisitation, I'm doing well to get that word out at 9:20, we will have to adjust that. As the gentleman said, we can't be paying people's university fees who are earning £150,000, £200,000 a year. We just haven't got the money to do that. Lovely though it would be for everybody, we can't do that. So we have to look at those in need and work a graduated scheme up where people will get X amount of money less when they're on that salary. It's the only way it can be workable. We can't pay for everybody.
Ms. Freeman.
I agree with the revisitation of that policy. I think that I agree. Currently, our figure it does seem rather high, and I think what we need to concentrate on is sustaining the value which we see in sending our students to university. No matter how we get there, that is our aim. The role of the next government will be to figure out how we get there. So at the moment, our pledges include yes, paying for university fees through our revenue based on our income tax adjustment. So I think so long as we keep our goals in mind, how we get there will be how we work together. So long as we keep hold of the value of sending university students away, them coming back to the island like we spoke about before, like sorting out those incentives, keeping clubs open till 6 o'clock in the morning, maybe not. But yeah, I think so long as we work together as a team in the States, we can come up with a way which is affordable and balanced and fair all round, which is our main goal, basically. Thank you.
Mr. Reniff.
The whole issue of funding for universities is a relatively new issue for us, with recent decisions being made. It did seem slightly strange to me that we were prepared to educate people until they were 18 years old. In fact, compelled, regardless of the income of their parents, until 16, and then suddenly a line was drawn beyond which there was no help. Some help has appeared. Whether or not the help should be restricted to those who come from low-income families is another debate that should happen. As Lindsey says, it has to be revisited. But I think the idea that we help is now established, and we mustn't let that go. One thing Jersey doesn't do is look at various alternatives for universities beyond the UK. The UK is extremely expensive. Out of all proportion to the rest of Europe, many countries in Europe offer free university places simply for being a resident there. So someone who moves to the country, as a student would, and gets an address will be resident and qualify for free education in some countries. We don't seem to have anything in place that encourages anybody to look in that sort of direction, which just seems a little bit remiss.
Deputy Panel.
Thank you, Mr. Mercier. We have always had grants for further education, university, art college, whatever it happens to be, for those unable to afford it. So this is always allowed the opportunity for people to go to university if they wish to, and the family couldn't afford it. Many of us, I think probably in this room, have worked extremely hard to put our children through university without the grant because of the income being slightly more than what the grant threshold is. And it has been very expensive, obviously worth it in the end. But now to come in, and I think you mentioned a sort of between 110 and 150,000 pounds. This started off at 150,000 pounds, which I very strongly objected to as being the ceiling as to which it would go up to. So a family income of £150,000, which to me is too high in order to issue a grant. It has been brought down to 110,000 and then on a sliding scale for maintenance or not. It's still quite, in my view, quite a high level to issue a grant. It seems to support the better off in our community and doesn't seem to cater quite so much for the middleman, for want of a better word, who would find this situation quite difficult.
Okay, thank you. Any further question? Mr. Swear, I'm rather reluctant to invite questions from people wearing candidates' colours, but in your case, I'm prepared to make an exception.
I don't think I need that. Mr. Le Connétable, I am one of your more mature voters, shall we say. I am sitting here increasingly confused. I know I'm in my dotage, but because there's so much contradiction. We've heard people deplore the fact that rents are so high, but surely that's market forces, because it's supply and demand, and there are not more houses because, we heard, there is too high a population. The population is going up. What I want to know, sir, from the candidates, would all this be solved if Jersey had real poverty, grinding poverty, so that people no longer wanted to come and live here, and then the houses would be empty and you could get into them from... Is that really a possible solution? It's not one I hope for.
Mr. Ashe.
I suppose the only time we've really seen maybe in your memory, sir, when we had real grinding poverty was in the Second World War. And in 1945, a lot of the people here did go home.
Ms. Freeman.
Last question of the evening. I'm not sure how to really tackle it. I think real poverty, I understand, it's not visible here. And I understand that there are people who say there aren't slums, there aren't people on the streets, we can't see it. It doesn't mean, unfortunately, that it doesn't exist within the houses. Behind closed curtains, behind the doors, people are really suffering. Now, if we were to bring that out onto streets, see that visibility, then perhaps we would see change. But let's not hope it gets to that stage. We don't want it to get to that. So I think through the policies we've all been talking about, I hope that in the next 4 years we will see a drastic improvement to the situations that a lot of people are living in. And I can only hope for that. Regardless of whether I get in, I will support my candidates who do. And I think that's the important thing to take away from this evening. Going back to my culture of blame thing that I really want to abolish, I think that we should all be in support of each other and work together and hope for a better future. So by envisioning it, we can get there. Thank you.
Mr. Renouf.
No, Mr. Swear, I would not advocate that we have grinding poverty. I don't think that's an ambition that any of us want. However, we do have something very measurable, and that's that Social Security do help people who don't get paid enough to pay their rent. This is measurable, we know it happens, and so that is something that we should be addressing.
Deputy Panel.
Thank you, Mr. Renouf. Social Security do that. Grinding poverty, nobody would live here. I think Mr. Swear is absolutely correct, but as Ms. Freeman said, I hope that we certainly wouldn't get there. We will have to be very aware of where Brexit leads us. Not that that will lead us to grinding poverty, but it might change the influx and outflux of people, which will have a big effect on how many people actually move here or stay here. So I think we wait for the result of the impact of Brexit.
Ms. Morrison.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Swear. I don't think you're going to like my answer, I'm afraid, but I'm an honest person, and as I speak now, I will continue throughout my election campaign. I see as you're in the front row, you're wearing a Vote Panel rosette. I have to be honest with you. I have campaigned for 4 weeks, and I will tell you, the vast majority of the doors I have knocked on, I have not had, the very first time I've opened the door, I have been told, "Are you with her?" That's what I've been told. Are you supporting her? That is what I have been told. I'm not lying. That is what I have been told. These people have lost their bonuses. These people have lost their bonuses. They have lost so much through something which is they couldn't control. And I'm sorry, but I cannot sit here while we're talking about no poverty and it doesn't exist and it is hidden away. I've seen it. I've spoken to people. And if you don't believe me, you go out and speak to them yourselves.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's now 9:30, so it's my intention now to bring these proceedings to a conclusion. Can I thank the Parish Hall staff for organising this event, for looking after the microphones?